British Foreign Secretary William Hague told members in the House of Commons yesterday that recent allegations the government's communications headquarters tried to circumvent the law to gather data on British citizens were, quote, baseless. He added that data obtained by the UK from the U.S. involving British citizens were, quote, subject to proper statutory controls and safeguards. Following his remarks, Mr. Hague took questions from members. This is an hour and 10 minutes.
Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs, Secretary William Hague.
Mr. Speaker, with permission, I will make a statement on the work of the Government Communications Headquarters, GCHQ, its legal framework and recent publicity about it. As Foreign Secretary, I am responsible for the work of GCHQ and the Secret Intelligence Service, SIS or MI6, under the overall authority of the Prime Minister. My right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, is responsible for the work of the Security Service, MI5. Over the last few days, there have been a series of media disclosures of classified US documents relating to the collection of intelligence by US agencies and questions about the role of GCHQ. The US administration has begun a review into the circumstances of these leaks in conjunction with the Justice Department and the US intelligence community. President Obama has been clear that US work in this area is fully overseen and authorized by Congress and relevant judicial bodies, and that his administration is committed to respecting the civil liberties and privacy of its citizens. The government deplores the leaking of any classified information wherever it occurs. Such leaks can make the work of maintaining the security of our own country and that of our allies more difficult, and by providing a partial and potentially misleading picture, they give rise to public concerns. It has been the policy of successive British governments not to comment on the detail of intelligence operations, and the House will therefore understand that I will not be drawn into confirming or denying any aspect of leaked information. I will be as informative as possible to give reassurance to the public and Parliament. We want the British people to have confidence in the work of our intelligence agencies and in their adherence to the law and democratic values. But I also wish to be very clear that I will take great care in this statement and in answering questions to say nothing clue or comfort to terrorist criminals or foreign intelligence services as they seek to do harm to this country and its people. Three issues have arisen in recent days which I wish to address. First, I will describe the action the government is taking in response to recent events. Second, I will set out how our intelligence agencies work in accordance with UK law and subject to democratic oversight. And third, I will describe how the law is upheld with respect to intelligence cooperation with the United States and deal with specific questions that have been raised about the work of GCHQ. First, in respect of the action we've taken, the Intelligence and Security Committee have already received some information from GCHQ, and they will receive a full report tomorrow. My right honourable friend, the member for Kensington, who chairs the committee, is travelling to the United States on a long-planned visit with the rest of the committee. As he has said, the committee will be free to decide what, if any, further action it should take in the light of that report. The government and the agencies will cooperate fully with the committee, and I pay tribute to its members and their predecessors on all sides of the House. Second, the ISC's work is one part of the strong framework of democratic accountability and oversight that governs the use of secret intelligence in the United Kingdom, which successive governments have worked to strengthen. At its heart are two acts of Parliament, the Intelligence Services Act of 1994 and the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act of the year 2000. The acts require GCHQ and the other agencies to seek authorization for their operations from a Secretary of State, normally the Foreign Secretary or Home Secretary. As Foreign Secretary, I receive hundreds of operational proposals from SIS and GCHQ every year. The proposals are detailed. They set out the planned operation, the potential risks and the intended benefits of the intelligence. They include comprehensive legal advice describing the basis for the operation and comments from senior Foreign Office officials and lawyers. To intercept the content of any individual's communications in the UK requires a warrant signed personally by me, the Home Secretary, or another Secretary of State. This is no casual process. Every decision is based on extensive legal and policy advice. Warrants are legally required to be necessary, proportionate, and carefully targeted, and we judge them on that basis. Considerations of privacy are also at the forefront of our minds, as I believe they will have been in the minds of our predecessors. We take great care to balance individual privacy with our duty to safeguard the public and the UK's national security. These are often difficult and finely judged decisions, and we do not approve every proposal put before us by the agencies. All the authorisations the Home Secretary and I do give are subject to independent review by an Intelligence Services Commissioner and an Interception of Communications Commissioner, both of whom must have held high judicial office and who report directly to the Prime Minister. They review the way these decisions are made to ensure they are fully compliant with the law, they have full access to all the information they need to carry out their responsibilities, and their reports are publicly available. It's vital that we have this framework of democratic accountability and scrutiny. But I also have nothing but praise for the professionalism, dedication and integrity of the men and women of GCHQ. I know from my work with them how seriously they take their obligations under UK and international law. Indeed, in his most recent report, the Intelligence Services Commissioner said, "It is my belief that GCHQ staff conduct themselves with the highest levels of integrity and legal compliance." This combination of needing a warrant from one of the most senior members of the government, decided on the basis of detailed legal advice, with such decisions reviewed by independent commissioners and implemented by agencies with strong legal and ethical frameworks, with the addition of parliamentary scrutiny by the ISC, whose powers are being increased, provides one of the strongest systems of checks and balances and democratic accountability for secret intelligence anywhere in the world. Third, I want to set out how UK law is upheld in respect of information received from the United States, and to address the specific questions about the role of GCHQ. Since the 1940s, GCHQ and its American equivalents, now the National Security Agency, have had a relationship that is unique in the world. This relationship has been and remains essential to the security of both nations. It has stopped many terrorist and espionage plots against this country, and it has saved many lives. The basic principles by which that cooperation operates have not changed over time. Indeed, I wish to emphasise to the House that while we have experienced an extremely busy period in intelligence and diplomacy in the last 3 years, the arrangements for oversight and the general framework for exchanging information with the United States are the same as under previous governments. The growing and diffuse nature of threats from terrorists, criminals or espionage has only increased the importance of our intelligence relationship with the United States. This was particularly the case in the run-up to the Olympics. The House will not be surprised that our activity to counter terrorism intensified and rose to a peak in the summer of last year. It has been suggested that GCHQ uses our partnership with the United States to get around UK law, obtaining information that they cannot legally obtain in the United Kingdom. I wish to be absolutely clear that this accusation is baseless. Any data obtained by us from the United States involving UK nationals is subject to proper UK statutory controls and safeguards, including the relevant sections of the Intelligence Services Act, the Human Rights Act, and the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act. Our intelligence sharing work with the United States is subject to ministerial and independent oversight and to scrutiny by the Intelligence and Security Committee. Our agencies practice and uphold UK law at all times, even when dealing with information from outside the United Kingdom. The combination of a robust legal framework, ministerial responsibility, scrutiny by the Intelligence Service Commissioners, and parliamentary accountability through the Intelligence and Security Committee should give a high level of confidence that the system works as intended. This does not mean that we don't have to work to strengthen public confidence whenever we can, while maintaining the secrecy necessary to intelligence work. We've strengthened the role of the ISC through the Justice and Security Act this year to include oversight of the agency's operations as well as their policy, administration and finances. And we've introduced the National Security Council so that intelligence is weighed and assessed alongside all other sources of information available to the government, including diplomatic reporting and the insights of other government departments, and that all this information is judged carefully in deciding the government's overall strategy and objectives. Mr. Speaker, there is no doubt that secret intelligence, including the work of GCHQ, is vital to our country. It enables us to detect threats against our country ranging from nuclear proliferation to cyber attack. Our agencies work to prevent serious and organised crime and to protect our economy against those trying to steal our intellectual property. They disrupt complex plots against our country, such as when individuals travel abroad to gain terrorist training and prepare attacks. They support the work of our armed forces overseas and help to protect the lives of our men and women in uniform. And they work to help other countries lawfully to build the capacity and willingness to investigate and disrupt terrorists in their countries before threats reach us in the United Kingdom. We should never forget that threats are launched at us secretly, new weapon systems and tactics are developed secretly, and countries or terrorist groups that plan attacks or operations against us do so in secrecy. So the methods we use to combat these threats must be secret, just as they must always be lawful. Mr. Speaker, if the citizens of this country could see the time and care taken in making these decisions, the carefully targeted nature of all our interventions, and the strict controls in place to ensure that the law and our democratic values are upheld, and if they could witness, as I do, the integrity and professionalism of the men and women of our intelligence agencies, who are among the very finest public servants our nation has, then I believe they would be reassured by how we go about this essential work. The British people can be confident in the way our agencies work to keep them safe. But would-be terrorists, those seeking to spy against this country, or those who are the centre of organised crime, should be aware that this country has the capability and partnerships to protect its citizens against the full range of threats in the 21st century, and that we will always do so in accordance with our laws and values, but with constant resolve and determination.
Mr. Douglas Alexander.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement and for advance sight of it this afternoon. The House will be aware that on Saturday the opposition, along with other members of this House, called for the Foreign Secretary to address Parliament today, and we welcome his decision to do so in recognition of the depth of public concern that has arisen in recent days. I want to begin my remarks by echoing the words of the Foreign Secretary and put on record the support and admiration of the whole House for the important, indeed vital work that is done by our country's intelligence and security services. Theirs is some of the most important but inevitably least recognised work undertaken to protect the security of our nation, and it is right that we take the opportunity to offer our thanks and praise for their efforts. Indeed, our intelligence agencies' work would be made more difficult if levels of concern about the framework under which they operate were to compromise the existing active support of the public for their efforts. In light of this, Mr. Speaker, can I quote back the words of the Foreign Secretary in a BBC interview yesterday when he stated, "If you are a law-abiding citizen of this country going about your business and your personal life, you have nothing to fear. Nothing to fear about the British state or intelligence agencies listening to the contents of your phone calls or anything like that." This assertion, however, assumes that the state is either incapable of error or incapable of advertent or inadvertent wrongdoing. Surely, on reflection, the Foreign Secretary will accept that law-abiding citizens of this country also want to know and be assured of the fact that the agencies of government are themselves law-abiding. Indeed, back in 2011, the Foreign Secretary seemed to recognise the importance of this point when he said in a speech on the role of the security services, and again I quote directly, "The need for secrecy places additional importance on the Foreign Secretary's accountability to Parliament for GCHQ and SIS. This is one of the indispensable foundations of public confidence and one that I will personally strive to strengthen." Mr. Speaker, today presents him with a clear opportunity to deliver on that pledge, and I hope in his answers to my specific questions he will be able to do so. While of course the Foreign Secretary is right to assume lawyers, some lawmakers, and indeed the members of the IFC may be very familiar with the framework of legality and accountability, the general public, for understandable reasons, are not. In light of that, will he take the opportunity of his response to remind the House of the steps we in Parliament have taken to preserve privacy and set out whether all steps taken by our agencies are, to the best of his knowledge, compliant with those laws? It is in this spirit, not of condemnation but concern, that I would like to ask the Foreign Secretary some questions around the recent allegations, first revealed by The Guardian on Friday of last week, about the existence and operation of the so-called PRISM programme administered by the NSA. Let me first make clear that we on this side of the House support the principle of information sharing across international borders with allies. Indeed, the people who want to do harm to the United Kingdom work across international borders, and those people working to keep us safe have to be able to work with allies across international borders if they are to tackle these threats effectively. But, Mr. Speaker, that needs to be within that established framework of both law and accountability. The Foreign Secretary is right to say that full disclosure on this issue is not possible nor appropriate. So let me focus my questions not on the specific operational aspect of the allegations, but on the broader legal and policy frameworks that would apply in these circumstances. Earlier this morning, the Chair of the Intelligence and Security Committee, the Right Honourable Member for Kensington, gave his account of the legal framework that would govern British intelligence agencies' use of intercept data. He said, and I quote directly, "If the British intelligence agencies are seeking to know the content of emails about people living in the UK, then they actually have to get legal authority. Normally that means ministerial authority. That applies equally whether they are going to do the intercept themselves or whether they are going to ask somebody else to do it on their behalf." Can the Foreign Secretary confirm whether that account given by the Chair of the ISC of the current legal framework is both complete and accurate? In his statement, the Foreign Secretary has just stated any data obtained by us from the US involving UK nationals is subject to proper UK statutory controls and safeguards, including the relevant sections of the Intelligence Services Act, the Human Rights Act and the regulation of the Investigatory Powers Act. Can he now set out what are the relevant sections of these acts, and can he confirm whether this explanation means any data obtained by us from the US involving UK nationals is authorised by ministerial warrants and overseen by the Intercept Commissioner as set out by RIPA? Specifically, can the Foreign Secretary tell the House what legal framework applies in the following two cases? First, when a request is made by the UK to an intelligence agency of an international ally for the interception of the content of private communications, can he confirm if this process is governed by individual warrants signed by the relevant Secretary of State and approved by the Intercept Commissioner as set out by Part 1 of RIPA 2000? Second, can he address the specific issue of when a request is made by the UK to an intelligence agency of an international ally not to seek intercept, but instead to search existing data held by that agency on the contents of private communications, and in particular the legal process which will be adopted in such an instance? In that circumstance, can he confirm whether this process is also governed by individual warrants signed by the relevant Secretary of State and approved by the Intercept Commissioner as set out by Part 1 of RIPA? Can the Foreign Secretary confirm that with respect to intelligence sharing with allies, the UK Government operates on the basis of the assumption that information held by, for example, the Government of the United States has been obtained in accordance with the law of that country? If that is the case, can he tell the House what steps he has or will take to confirm that any processes currently in use by the NSA continue to adhere to this legal safeguard?
The Shadow Foreign Secretary, he's now exceeded his allotted time, so I feel sure he's in his last sentence. Mr. Douglas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To conclude, all of us in this House have an interest in sustaining public confidence in the work of the intelligence agencies. These agencies each and every day do outstanding work on behalf of all of us and for the sake of us all. That is why both ministers and the ISC now have a heavy burden of responsibility to oversee and scrutinise their work so as to reassure the public.
the Foreign Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman, and I'm, of course, pleased that he began his remarks by expressing the support across this House, support and admiration for the work of the agencies. There will be many former ministers from the last government, and there are some very specific ones here today who know that very well themselves. He was quite right to say that their work is among the most important and the least recognised that goes into protecting this country. And so we have very strong common ground across the House. He said that we should be able to, now and in the future, give people assurance about the law-abiding nature of the work of the agencies, and that is, of course, a large part of the purpose of what I've just been explaining to the House. I'm not saying that the agencies or anyone who work in them, or indeed ministers, are incapable of error, of course. That can happen in any organisation. But I am arguing that there is a strong system of checks and balances, the combination of ministerial oversight, of independent scrutiny, of parliamentary oversight, and the legal framework, the strong ethical framework of the agencies themselves minimise the chance of error in any sinister way. Sometimes when you see discussion in the media about this, people can get the impression there is a danger of a deep state out of control in some way. There is not that danger in the United Kingdom. So of course everyone is capable of error. But the protection of the citizens of this country provide from such error is very, very strong indeed. There will always be ways, I must stress, of improving our procedures. There have been many improvements over recent years under successive administrations, and there are always new situations that arise in intelligence gathering that require the additions to or the refinement of the legal basis of what we do, or the practices and procedures by which we do this work. So I would not argue at all that everything is definitely perfect, and certainly not for all time, in terms of could there be any improvement in procedures in the future in some areas. I'm sure there could be, and the Intelligence and Security Committee will be able to look at that, will be able to make any recommendations they want to do so. And of course within the government this is something that is constantly looked at and constantly subject to change. He's right that the general public will not be, there is no reason why the general public would be familiar with this framework that I've set out in the House. I was the first Foreign Secretary to give a speech, although it might have been widely unnoticed in this House, I'm not sure, about the role of secret intelligence in foreign policy in November 2011, setting out for the public what the guarantees are, what the legal framework is. This, in a way, is an opportunity to set that out clearly to the country. He was quite right to say that he supports information sharing with our allies, and the position on the legal framework is exactly as I've set it out in my statement, that any data obtained by us from the United States about UK nationals is subject to the full range of acts based on Section 3 of the Intelligence Services Act, on the REPA provisions, of course, in Regulation of Investigatory Powers, in Sections 15 and 16 that regulate that information must be necessary, the gathering of information must be necessary and proportionate, and that regulate how the agencies handle information when they obtain it. On his further questions about how authority is given, I can't give him, for reasons that are that I cannot explain in public, an answer as detailed as he would like. I would love to give him what actually could be a very helpful answer, but because circumstances vary and because procedures vary according to the situation, I don't want to give a categoric answer that may, in small respect, where circumstances may differ occasionally, but I can say that ministerial oversight, independent scrutiny is there, and the scrutiny of the ISC in all of these situations. And so, again, the idea that operations are carried out without ministerial oversight, somehow getting around UK law is a mistaken idea. But I can't, I'm afraid, be more specific than that.
Mr. David Davis.
Nobody in this House would dispute the value of well-targeted intelligence, and certainly not me. But central to this issue are the UK FISA laws, which distinguish between American citizens who receive rigorous protection of their privacy and all other foreigners, including British citizens, who receive essentially no protection. Now, when the Americans are concerned about assaults on their citizens, they pursue this with an aggression that would make Lord Palmerston proud. Most obviously the extradition arrangements, for example. So has the Foreign Secretary made any representations to the American authorities about the protection of innocent British citizens' privacy under their FISA laws?
Well, we apply our own laws. This is the central point. The United States decides its own laws and applies its own laws in the United States. We do so in the United Kingdom as well. And this is the central point that I am making about this, that all of the acts that we have passed in this Parliament relating to the gathering of intelligence are applied to data supplied from other countries. Of course, we also discuss, while I can't give him a specific answer about specific discussions, we regularly discuss with the United States the framework for these things, again to make sure, as best we can, that our values, that our legal frameworks are upheld, that the strong emphasis on the privacy of the citizen is always there. The United States, as my right honourable friend will have seen in the statements of President Obama, is very, very tough about that as well. And when the UK and US both work together, each with a strong legal framework, the combined effect is a very strong and protective one.
Mr. Jack Straw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Secretary of State accept that many of our allies, leave aside the United States, are astonished by the degree of control and supervision of our system of ministerial oversight by judicially qualified commissioners and by the ISC in this country, which surpasses that of most other Western democracies? And would he also accept that those in the agencies face an impossible dilemma? When things are relatively calm, then suspicions, fantasies, sometimes paranoia can take off about the so-called secret state. But the moment there is a serious threat or actual terrorist outrage, often the very same people and newspapers turn on a sixpence, and their demand is not whether the safeguards were operated, but why it is there's been a failure by those agencies to track through intelligence of all kinds the miscreants involved.
The Right Honourable General is absolutely right and is very experienced in these matters as a former Foreign Secretary. I argued in my statement earlier that the system of checks and balances and scrutiny that we have is among the strongest in the world. It could be the strongest in the world. And he knows that very well. And yes, he is quite right that the agencies easily come in for criticism when anything that goes wrong, and yet they have to be ensuring at all times that they are gathering all the information they ought to be obtaining. And so it is often they undertake a task that isn't thanked and recognised often enough, and they have achieved a great deal in frustrating attacks on this country, including in recent years planned terrorist attacks on this country, some of which we cannot talk about, which are not known to the public. And so it's difficult to give them the recognition that they deserve. But that is the scale of and the importance of this crucial work.
Mr. Martin Horwood.
I declare a strong constituency interest, Mr. Speaker. Veterans of Bletchley Park, like my own parents, were and are now widely described as heroes for the secret victories that we can now talk about, but kept their secrets for many decades. Does the Foreign Secretary agree that GCHQ, as Bletchley's successor, now does equally vital but equally secret work, and that honourable members may have to exercise just a fraction of that kind of self-restraint and allow some of the perfectly legitimate questions about PRISM to be answered in private to elected members of the Intelligence and Security Committee we have set up for precisely this purpose.
My honourable friend spoken well about GCHQ and the work of his constituents, which he and I both greatly admire. And of course, the Intelligence and Security Committee is able to look at any aspects of this, including secret and top secret aspects of this discussion. That is, for those outside the House who may not be aware of it, a cross-party committee of members who are already very familiar with so many of the issues surrounding secret intelligence. So that is the proper place for these issues to be gone into in detail. But I'm sure this House is able to show the necessary restraint in its questions and comments that are fitting for a discussion today about secret intelligence.
Mr. David Blunkett.
Mr. Speaker, could I reinforce what my right honourable friend for Blackburn has said this afternoon and confirm what the Foreign Secretary said in terms of the legal and the ethical framework and the safeguards that exist. From my own experience, I know that to be true. It's from that background that I ask this simple question. Yes, we do need to dampen down fear. Yes, we do need to reinforce the fact that we are engaged in international cyber attack and the dangers that come from international global terrorism. But in doing that, in reinforcing and reassuring people about the way we handle their data, can we take a closer look at how other agencies, including the NSA and our friends and colleagues in the United States, use material gathered from network and service providers and offer it rather than having it sought from them in a way that makes authorisation extremely difficult?
Well, like his right honourable friend, the right honourable general speaks with his own experience of the highly professional work of the agencies. The point he raises reinforces the importance of our agencies applying and upholding the laws of the United Kingdom about the data that they obtain from other intelligence agencies around the world. And as I was mentioning earlier to the right honourable gentleman, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, there may well be occasions over the coming years where we need to update and improve those procedures to take account of changes in technology. So I don't exclude that at all, but it re-emphasises the importance of applying our law in our country, which the agencies can be relied on to do.
Mr. Nicholas Soames.
Speaker, I think people will have great confidence in hearing what my right honourable friend said about the request for intercept and for operations in this country being so very rigorous indeed. But would he also agree that the highly complex nature of modern communications inevitably means that from time to time privacy may have to be breached in the interests of the security of our country and its people?
Yes, of course, Mr. Speaker. A would-be terrorist cannot rely on their privacy. Someone at the centre of organised crime cannot be allowed to rely on their privacy. And it is the decisions about these things that my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, and I, and sometimes our other colleagues, have to make. I will say that we take extra steps and we take extra care about privacy. The law explicitly requires us to make sure that our actions are necessary and proportionate and are targeted. But we go beyond those requirements in assessing the impact on the privacy of individuals to try to make sure that it is only when it is absolutely necessary that we are invading that privacy.
Diana Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, one of the key motivations for the reform of the Intelligence and Security Committee was to help with transparency and to engage with the public and to give confidence. So I wondered if the Foreign Secretary was in a position to say that any report that the ISC might produce on PRISM would be published and would have as limited redactions as possible when it was published.
Well, I can't give any assurance that reports on the issues that have been raised will be public, of course, because, as I've argued in my statement, there is an important role for secret intelligence, and our deliberations about that have to therefore be secret. The ISC makes a variety of reports. Some of them are published and redacted, exactly as she says. But I think consideration will have to be given in the ISC to the format of their report, of course. But I certainly can't at this stage give any guarantee that their findings will be public.
Sir Gerald Howarth.
Mr. Speaker, may I congratulate my right honourable friend on an excellent statement to this House in which the British people should have every confidence. And I wonder if he would agree with me that, notwithstanding the reservations of our right honourable friend for Holton Price and Howden, nevertheless, the essence of the protection of the British people relies hugely on that cooperation between the United Kingdom and the United States. And in that respect, too, we both face threats from China. And I wonder if he has any comments to make to the House today on a very illuminating report from the Intelligence and Services Committee last week.
I'm grateful. I'm largely grateful to my honourable friend for his question and his strong support for the position of the government on this. He is quite right to underline again the extreme importance to our national security of our close and unique cooperation with the United States. It's been my general approach, as my honourable friend knows, not to publicly point fingers or fling accusations at other countries about intelligence activities, and so despite his tempting invitation to do so, I'm not going to do that today.
Mr. Paul Murphy.
Mr. Speaker, as a former chair of the ISC, I have nothing but admiration for the work of GCHQ. But the Foreign Secretary agrees that the ISC should now investigate these allegations. Would he agree, and would he indeed encourage the ISC to report very swiftly to the Prime Minister, which is their custom, and secondly, if possible, within the constraints of national security, then to the House of Commons?
Yes, of course, they should report, of course, to the Prime Minister. And I don't want to preempt any decision by them or the Prime Minister about the nature of any reporting to the public and to Parliament. But I issue the cautionary words that I spoke a moment ago. But the committee, I'm sure, will want to undertake its work swiftly, but as swiftly as proper consideration of all the issues allows. I think we will all want them to look at any such questions very thoroughly, and that is the most important requirement.
Mr. Raymond Chishti.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much welcome the statement by the Foreign Secretary. On the point of sharing intelligence by GCHQ, can the Foreign Secretary clarify whether the United Kingdom provides locational intelligence to the United States in relation to drone strikes in Afghanistan and Pakistan?
Well, as I explained in my statement, Mr. Speaker, successive governments have not commented on the details of how we use intelligence information. My statement is about the legal framework that governs this and the values that we uphold. But I cannot comment and will not comment on what intelligence we share with other countries.
Mr. Ben Bradshaw.
Given the rather different approaches to privacy and data protection in Europe and the United States, what assessment has he made of the potential for this controversy to have an impact on the successful outcome to the EU-America free trade deal, and what's the government doing to try to stop that happening?
Well, I've no evidence at the moment, Mr. Speaker, of any impact on that. We are putting a great effort into that, particularly the government is putting great effort into that over the coming days with our European partners to try to make sure that rapid progress is made on a transatlantic trade and investment partnership. I don't see any reason why the questions raised in the media over the last few days should have any significant impact on that.
Mr. Peter Bone.
Mr. Speaker, the Foreign Secretary is quite right to say in democracies it's important that some things are kept secret. But it's equally important that members of this House should be free to have discussions without any fear of interception by the government. So can the Foreign Secretary confirm that no member is having his phone tapped or his emails intercepted?
Well, there is a long-standing convention about this, named after a former Prime Minister, former Labour Prime Minister, and that convention has always been upheld. So I think he and Mrs. Bone can be assured about this.
The Reverend William McRae.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Foreign Secretary assure the House that the security services have all the tools that are necessary to keep our citizens safe, even though at times that may be the sacrifice of personal freedoms?
They do have the tools. I said earlier that those tools need updating over time. And of course there is the, I haven't referred in my statement to the discussions about communications data bill, but there is a very strong case for updating the tools that we have at our disposal. The means of communication are changing more rapidly than at any time in the history of the world. And that means that the range and nature of threats changes. So we must be careful to do that work, and the whole House should give fair consideration to such proposals.
John Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend has confirmed that this government and the intelligence services have no interest in random snooping into the private affairs of British citizens. But when well-founded security risks are identified, then can he confirm to the House that sufficient powers and freedoms are in place to undertake the investigations that may be necessary, or is it his opinion that enhanced freedoms and powers are now required?
In my experience, of course, we are well equipped to conduct investigations that we need to conduct, but I really go back to the answer I gave to the previous question. There will constantly be a need to update what we're able to do without being diverted from these basic principles of ensuring that our intelligence gathering is about matters that are necessary, that are proportionate, that are targeted, that are always legal. Our laws do not provide for indiscriminate trawling for information through the contents of people's communications, and we don't need to change those basic principles. But we do sometimes need to change the aspects of the legal framework and where we're able to get information from. So that work must go on over the coming years.
Mr. David Winnick.
The dangers to the individual concerned. Why should we believe that the American whistleblower is telling a pack of lies? And if a lot of what he is saying is true, then surely law-abiding citizens, a million miles from any threat involved with terrorism, should indeed be fearful.
Well, I've not commented, as you notice, Mr. Speaker, on the individual concern, because I'm not going to get into giving any running commentary on this or other leaks in the future. It's not possible for any government to do that while respecting the need to maintain the secrecy of our intelligence work. So I don't want to get into that now, but I stress again the very strong legal framework in this country, and I believe people can have confidence in that.
Mr. Henry Bellingham.
Speaker, all of our constituents should be incredibly grateful for the security services and the work they do, and some will owe their lives to their professionalism. Can the Secretary of State confirm that one of the biggest threats to our national security is through stolen identities? And so surely GCHQ have to be ever more innovative to stay one step in front.
My honourable friend is right to draw attention to that. And certainly part of the work of GCHQ is to make it easier for us to combat organised crime, serious and organised crime. In many ways, the citizens of the privacy of the citizens of this country benefits substantially from the work of our agencies because of what they are doing to protect the country. And there is a very strong argument to be made about that, rather than that their privacy is invaded. So that is a growing threat, and it is up to, of course, the private sector in many cases working with GCHQ to make sure that we're well equipped to defeat it.
Anne Fluid.
As one who continues to campaign for the young US British soldier Bradley Manning and exchanges emails and telephone calls with his defence counsel, can I assume that I am free from any surveillance, either United States or British?
Well, I think I can only reiterate what I said to my honourable friend a moment ago about the Wilson doctrine. So I believe she can be confident in that.
Time for a dose from the Doctor. Dr. Julian Huppert.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Many British people use the online tools that are affected by PRISM. Many British companies will have very commercially sensitive data there. Many people in government as well. Now, the Americans are partly protected, but what rules are there over the collection of British data by the NSA or the uses that can be put to that data after it's been collected?
Well, the rule, again, Mr. Speaker, the House will understand that I'm not going into, I'm not speculating about the content of any leak or what has been argued in newspapers over the last few days. But we do have our own clear legal framework, the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, the Intelligence Services Act, and the Human Rights Act. And all of those things apply to data obtained by this country through cooperation with the United States, just as, of course, they apply to any data we obtain ourselves. And so I think people can be confident about that.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that EU data protection laws currently offer no protection against backdoor US surveillance of this sort, will he commit to pushing the government for stronger measures for the current EU proposals, or does he agree with the Justice Secretary, who's reported to have said that plans to strengthen protections for UK citizens and businesses from such unwarranted spying are, and I quote, mad?
Well, I think the Honourable may be quoting the Justice Secretary slightly out of context on that, in that he will be referring to other aspects of the proposals. So I can't give her any guarantee that these controversies make it easier to agree to propose particular proposals for EU directives. I will go with my right honourable friend, the Justice Secretary, on these matters.
Ben Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Couldn't the Guardian's sort of non-story be summed up as a foreign government monitors international terrorists and shares intelligence with its allies? Yeah. Would the Foreign Secretary join me in paying tribute to our allies who share intelligence so that British citizens remain safe, both here and abroad?
I absolutely join in the tribute to our allies. We depend on them a great deal in the United States for our national security, particularly in intelligence matters. They also depend on us. This is a very important two-way relationship, greatly assisting the security of both nations, and it reaffirms what an indispensable relationship this is for the United Kingdom.
Mr. Ronnie Campbell.
It's not a question of gathering information on the terrorists. I think 99% of the British public would agree with that. Yeah. It's the little fella, it's the fella that maybe is organising a demonstration against the government rotten policy, or even a trade union like Len McCluskey, or even Bob Crow organising a strike. Remember, Foreign Minister, I was involved in the 1984 miners' strike, and there was some funny intelligence went on then, mate.
Right, well, I can only speak about the legal framework we're operating now on the basis of two Acts of Parliament in 1994 and the year 2000. And I can assure that if the Home Secretary and I were signing interception warrants on political grounds, we would be in a great deal of trouble with the Interception Commissioner and with the ISC as well. So I think, again, he can be reassured about that.
Mr. Michael Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will my right honourable friend agree that our relationship with the United States is a cornerstone of our national security infrastructure in this country, and that the exchange of material works both ways and aids the US as well as the UK, and that those who work on the paranoid assumption that this or some other particular programme is there to spy on UK and US citizens are wrong, that a large proportion of the data that is collected is against third-party citizens in third-party countries?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, including about the importance of the relationship and including about the inevitably the vast proportion of work done by the UK and US intelligence agencies together that is to guard against threats from elsewhere in the world.
Dennis Skinner.
In following on from what my honourable friend, the member for Blyth, raised,
and the fact that GCHQ have been involved in trade union disputes for a long time. Can he give me an assurance that since he won't explain precisely how this interception takes place on the advice of a minister, surely if the Prime Minister of the day in 1984 said that the miners and the NUM were the enemy within, wouldn't that give the green light to GCHQ to intervene in every single coalfield? Because that's what we believe.
We are in a different century now. We are 13 years into the 21st century. The challenges are different. The focus of the intelligence agencies is very different from decades in the past, very different, of course, from the Cold War. And so I do think it's very important for honourable members below the gangway opposite to start to move with the times.
Is it not the case that our national security has relied for centuries on the effective intercept of communications, and that the Spanish Armadas the Spanish Armada was said to have been averted as much by the pen of Francis Walsingham as by the Royal Navy? Surely what has changed is the nature of that communication. And the threat to the public comes not from the intelligence agencies, who have no interest at all in the communications of members of the public, but will not be able to intercept communications if that data is not retained by providers.
Since I've refused to go back into the miners' strike, I'm going to be reluctant to enter into the Spanish Armada. I think that the wider point that my honourable friend makes is absolutely correct, of course, and of course two cross-party committees in this House have looked, for instance, at proposals for communications data bill and have said that changes are necessary, and I think my right honourable friend is adding to that point.
Mr. William Bain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Secretary of State spell out to the House the precise difference in the legal framework applicable to the obtaining of intercept data by our own intelligence services and that which applies to the use by our intelligence services of information obtained by their counterparts overseas?
The legal framework is the one that I have set out. The acts that I referred to passed by this Parliament apply to all of the intelligence gathered by the agencies, and he'll know, of course, that, for instance, Section 3 of the Intelligence Service Act confers particular powers and roles on GCHQ. So these things are governed by the same acts of Parliament. Procedures do differ, of course, in many different situations, and it's because I can't describe all of those situations in public that I can't go into exactly what that means for procedures in every case. So I can't go as far in reassuring the honourable gentleman or the Shadow Foreign Secretary as they would like. But if they could see the full detail of what happens, I think they would take an enormous measure of reassurance from it.
Sir Tony Baldry.
Given the comments of the Right Honourable Gentleman for Blackburn and other former cabinet ministers opposite, can the House reasonably infer that there has been no change in policy in regards to GCHQ and information sharing from the last government to this government? In other words, the system that prevails at present is identical to that which persisted and pertained when the opposition were in government.
Well, matters do. The challenges of gathering intelligence do change over time, and so I wouldn't want to give the House the impression that all practices and all techniques are all exactly the same or done in the same way. I can say, as I said in my statement, that the general framework remains the same. The principles of our intelligence sharing with the United States and the general framework for that certainly remain the same. The values on which it is based remain the same as under successive governments.
Mr. Wishart.
Mr. Speaker, we know that the Foreign Secretary, the Home Secretary and all his right honourable friends in the Conservative Party Cabinet want their own retention of large swathes of personal data, and he's prepared to compromise our civil liberties to obtain that. But does this episode not just demonstrate what could possibly go wrong if we had our own homegrown Stoopers Charter?
Well, I think the honourable member is referring again, and I've referred in earlier answers to the Communications Data Bill, to a draft bill. Two parliamentary committees have considered the draft bill and conclude there is a need for new legislation in this area, and the government is committed to bringing forward proposals in the near future on that.
Bob Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are actually at cyber war at the moment. Since the year 2000, the attacks on this country from cyber warfare seem to have multiplied by about 20-fold. The Chinese held an exercise last week which they called the Digital Technology Exercise at divisional level. Men in uniform who are designed specifically to attack the West. Actually, hacking can be far more deadly than a gun. Can I encourage the Foreign Secretary and all his colleagues to ensure that GCHQ are as close to the National Security Agency as is possible in the future?
Well, GCHQ does have the unique relationship that I've described with the National Security Agency. My honourable friend is right to say that cyber attack is an increasing threat in many different areas of government and of life in general. That's why in the Strategic Defence and Security Review 3 years ago, the government decided to invest an additional £650 million in our cyber capabilities over a 4-year period. The United Kingdom is one of the world leaders in cyber defence and cyber capabilities, and we are determined that we will remain in that position.
Tom Watson.
For clarity, could the Foreign Secretary say if he was told how the NSA collects the information, and on what date was he made aware of the PRISM project?
Well, I go back to what I've said, Mr. Speaker, about not being able to confirm or deny leaked information. So I am not commenting in any at all on information that has appeared in the newspapers. There may be leaks in future from who knows which agency, and I will take the same view. We cannot conduct ourselves in these matters by commenting on every leak that takes place. Therefore, I can't tell him, but of course the Intelligence Security Committee will be able to look at these questions. I can't tell him in public the answers to the sorts of questions that he's raising.
Mr. Rory Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Foreign Secretary, I'm afraid that because this type of secret operation is not just a legal problem, but it's about a very difficult balancing of security and liberty, we should do more to explain what we're doing. An American citizen would have the right to an answer to the question asked by the Honourable Member for Gillingham on the location offered to American drone strikes. Unless we begin to explain more to the public, secret operations in the long term will not be sustainable. The public must understand, and understanding consent.
Well, I go a certain way with my honourable friend on this. I think there is a need to explain to the public more than we have done for decades in this country the role of secret intelligence, its purpose, what it achieves. I don't think that will mean that we're able to describe in detail how our cooperation works on operational matters with other countries, for many obvious reasons, that it makes it more difficult for us to protect this country in so many different ways if other people know the exact techniques that we use, and because other countries will be less willing to share their intelligence with us if they think that we are not good at keeping it to ourselves in the UK. But we certainly need to raise the public awareness of the need for what we do. I started to do that in my speech of 2011 on this subject. Perhaps today's statement will also have that effect.
Paul Flynn. The Cathay Massacre case proved that 50 years after the last war of intensive surveillance of peace activists, trade unionists and left-wing parties failed to turn up a single spy, but in that same period more than 20 members of the Secret Service were spying for the Soviet Union. Since then we've had untruths on weapons of mass destruction, we've had a government cover-up
to this House of the handing over of prisoners to be tortured by oppressive regimes? Is he telling us today that the only people under surveillance now are the guilty? How do they manage that?
Well, I'm telling the honourable member in the House about the many checks and balances, the strong legal framework, and I think it's fair to point out on all the controversies that he is listing of the past, and they're controversies rather than necessarily facts that he has just listed, that there has been a constant process of improving how the intelligence agencies work under successive governments. For instance, we saw the Butler report after the controversies about the use of intelligence in the Iraq war, and that has changed substantially the way that intelligence is presented to ministers and the way that ministers decide. I referred in my statement to the creation of the National Security Council and intelligence being given its due weight but proper weight alongside other information and considered in the round. So he should take heart that such improvements take place.
Mr. Duncan Hames.
Speaker, it's good to know that our legal framework is not lost on the Foreign Secretary. He tells us that there are no grounds to suggest that GCHQ obtains information from the United States that they could not obtain legally in the UK. Is it also the case that there are standard procedures in place sufficient to prevent that from happening?
Well, what I've argued, Mr. Speaker, is that the idea that that GCHQ is setting out to circumvent UK law by cooperation with other countries is baseless, because UK law is applied to the data that they receive, even if they receive it from the United States, and because the ministerial oversight, the independent oversight is all there. And of course, part of the purpose of that oversight is to ensure that the misuse of the powers and role of GCHQ does not take place.
Mr. Angus Brendan McNeill.
Mr. Speaker. The term is used that the intelligence services always operate within a legal framework. Is he certain that legal framework always means ethically and within the law, and also not into peaceful, elected and democratic political parties within the UK?
Well, yes, it does mean that it does mean those things. It means that it is properly, the legal framework is properly applied, that what we do, what the agencies do, has to be targeted, it has to be necessary, it has to be proportionate, it has to be authorised, and it has to be for the purposes that are set out in the relevant acts of Parliament. In the interests of national security, for the economic well-being of the country, or for the prevention and protection, or for the prevention of serious crime and the protection of the country from serious crime. These are the purposes of our intelligence agencies, and that is what they stick to.
Dr. Sarah Wollaston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If a member of staff working at GCHQ had real concerns about wrongdoing among colleagues, is the Foreign Secretary absolutely confident that the channels exist for that member of staff to have their concerns heard without needing to go to the media?
Yes, absolutely. But, not only in such a case should concerns be raised through the management structure, but there is also the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, to which members of the intelligence services can take complaints or concerns without having to do so in public.
Margot James.
I'm so sorry, Mr. Speaker. I was just getting up to leave the chamber.
Go on, answer it. We're sorry the Honourable Lady is taking her leave, but we'll hear from her on other occasions. No, the Honourable Lady has nothing for which to apologise. I mistakenly thought she was trying to contribute. She should take her leave. We'll give her a cheer. And we'll hear from her again soon. She's a very regular contributor. Mr. Philip Hollowbone.
May I commend my right honourable friend for his statement, for his personal grip and command over this issue, and for all the work that the security services do. I imagine that by the nature of their work and the people they are, our security service people are reticent about talking about their successes. But at a time of heightened tension about international and domestic terrorism, could the Foreign Secretary encourage our security services, where possible, to put into the public domain the success stories in countering threats to our national security?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and he's right that in suggesting that we should be able, of course, to celebrate their successes. Unfortunately, we will have to continue to celebrate those successes in fairly general terms. He will understand that if we proclaimed some of our most successful intelligence operations in public, it would then be very difficult to repeat them. And this, unfortunately, we have to protect this country against the same type of threat again and again, particularly from terrorism. So I can't offer at the moment to say more specifically what they have succeeded in doing, but he can take it from me that there is much that is not known in the protection of this country, particularly from terrorism, but also from organised crime, that the country would truly celebrate if they knew about it.
Mark Pritchard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I join the Foreign Secretary in praising the professionalism and dedication of both SIS and GCHQ staff. Edward Snowden, the CIA official who leaked this information, said he leaked this information because he wanted to stand up against oppression and stand up for liberty. Therefore, is there not a perverse paradox that this gentleman makes these claims not from Washington or London, but from the People's Republic of China?
Well, having set myself the rule earlier on of not attacking the conduct of other nations, I'm not going to break that now. But of course, other people will be able to comment on this particular individual and his role. Of course, it's important for everyone who works for the agencies to remember that part of their responsibility is to uphold the laws of their country, and that in the case of the United States and the United Kingdom, those laws are designed to protect the lives and the liberty of the citizens of those countries. That seems to be something that has been too easily forgotten over the last few days.
Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. NATO suffered a suspected 2,500 cyber attacks on its network last year. Can my right honourable friend confirm whether there's a similar level of suspected cyber attacks on GCHQ?
There are undoubtedly cyber attacks against all Western intelligence agencies, including on GCHQ. Of course, GCHQ is particularly well adapted to defend itself against cyber attacks and to have some idea where they're coming from and when they're coming. I won't go into any more detail than that, but people would be quite fortunate to mount a successful cyber attack against GCHQ itself.
Julian Smith.
The rigour, quality and sheer scale of American intelligence is second to none. Given the threats that the UK currently faces, can I urge the Foreign Secretary to continue his very robust public defence of the UK-US intelligence relationship?
Yes, I feel suitably urged by my honourable friend and many other members of this House. It is always worth reminding ourselves again of the indispensable nature of that relationship, even though we cannot give many of the details about it. It is a fundamental part, a cornerstone, as one of our honourable friends said earlier, of maintaining the security of this country.
Dominic Raab.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome the reassurances from the Foreign Secretary and just seek a point of clarity? If the UK is intercepting emails on British citizens, it requires a warrant from the Secretary of State, and that vital check isn't in place when communications are received under prison. So does he accept that it can, quite legally, be used to sidestep the level of safeguards that apply to UK-sourced intercept, and how do we mitigate against that risk?
Well, this is, again, I don't want anything that I say to be taken as commenting on leaked information over the last few days, but the issues raised by it, including the issues referred to by my honourable friend, will be able to be studied by the Intelligence and Security Committee. That is the proper forum for it. I've stressed how ministerial oversight and independent oversight applies to our relations with other intelligence agencies, including the United States, and so he shouldn't jump to any conclusions about the absence of such oversight and authority.
Mr Stephen Mosley.
Mr Speaker, does my right honourable friend agree that the concerns raised by some members of this House actually demonstrates the limitations of the current REPA system, which has failed to keep up with modern technological trends, and the need for new legislation to make sure that the legislation we have is up to date, has parliamentary oversight, covers all the concerns raised, such as the Communications Data Bill as amended by the joint committees of both houses of the Lords and the Commons?
Well, the case for a communications data bill rests on its own merits. Of course, my honourable friend refers to some of those merits, and the government will bring forward proposals in the near future on this subject.
Order.
We'll have more from London tomorrow when Prime Minister David Cameron takes questions from members of the British Parliament. You can see that live beginning at 7 a.m. Eastern on our